It all began with what seemed like the most ordinary morning, the kind of morning where you expect peace and calm. I walked outside and breathed in the fresh air, only to see a letter taped to my fence. The envelope carried the stamp of the HOA, and inside, it was a fine that nearly knocked the air out of my chest. $250,000 for violations on my own land, my own property, my safe place, the home I had built with my own two hands. I remember my hands shaking as I held that paper. I thought it was a joke or some kind of mistake, but it was real, and it felt like my entire world was collapsing in front of me. For years, I had been the quiet neighbor, the one who didn't cause trouble, the one who stayed on my side of the fence. But the HOA, they always looked at me like I didn't belong, like I was an outsider in my own town. They sent me letters before, little complaints about my barn, about my animals, about the old tractor I parked on the side of my land, but I never expected them to cross this line. $250,000 for existing on my own soil. It wasn't just money they wanted, it was control, it was power, it was their way of breaking me. I sat at my kitchen table that night staring at the fine. As the sun went down, I thought about my father, who worked these fields before me. I thought about my grandfather, who laid down the first fence posts with nothing but sweat and calloused hands. I thought about the generations before me who fought to keep this land in the family. This wasn't just dirt, it wasn't just grass or barns. This was my legacy, this was blood in the soil. And they thought they could take it away with a piece of paper. The next day, they showed up, the HOA board, in their shiny cars with their folders and fake smiles. They walked my property, pointing their fingers, whispering to each other, laughing like they already owned it. They looked at me like I was small, like I was powerless. And one woman even said, "We can make this easy, or we can make this hard." Her voice was cold, sharp, meant to cut me down. But inside, I felt a fire begin to rise. They thought they could intimidate me, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. For weeks, I searched for answers. I dug through old deeds, maps, and records. I spent nights at the county office poring over dusty files. I bought GPS equipment. I learned how to trace property lines with precision. And the deeper I went, the clearer the truth became. The neighborhood, the fancy homes, the tennis courts, the fountains, and even their clubhouse, every single thing had been built on my land, not theirs. Mine. The day I found the proof, my hands trembled, not from fear, but from power. I had uncovered the truth, and with that truth, I held the future of the entire neighborhood in my hands. They had fined me for standing on my own land, but it turned out they had been trespassing for years, building their empire on soil that was never theirs. I called a meeting. I told them to come to my property. They arrived in a line of cars, polished clean, like they were heading to a victory parade. But when I spread out the maps on the hood of my truck and showed them the legal documents, the air shifted. Their confident faces fell. The woman who had threatened me turned pale. The man who had laughed at me looked down at his shoes. And for the first time, I wasn't the one being intimidated. They were. One of them tried to argue, but the facts were undeniable. The GPS coordinates, the county records, the original deed from generations back. It all proved one thing: the land they stood on was mine. And in that moment, I saw the fear in their eyes, because everything they thought they owned could be gone in an instant. The story didn't end there, because owning the truth doesn't always mean victory. It means choice. I could have taken it all back. I could have evicted them, stripped them of everything they built. But I remembered the words my father once told me: "Son, power isn't about what you can take, it's about what you can give." So I stood there looking at people who had disrespected me, humiliated me, tried to crush me with their rules. And I told them this: I won't destroy your homes. I won't tear down what you've built. But from this day forward, you will respect me. You will respect this land. And you will never again try to take from me what is mine. Silence fell over the group. Some nodded, others couldn't even look at me. But they all knew the balance of power had shifted, and it would never be the same again. I turned and walked back to my home, my boots heavy with mud, but my heart light with victory. I didn't just win back my land, I won back my dignity, my honor, my place in the world. And that was worth more than any fine or fortune. Sometimes life tries to break you. Sometimes people try to push you down and make you feel small. But if you stand your ground, if you hold on to the truth and never give up, you'll find the strength inside you to rise. And when you rise higher than anyone ever thought possible. This was not just my fight, it was every fight of every person who has been told they are powerless, when in truth they hold the greatest power of all, the right to stand tall on their own ground. So when I look at that letter now, the one that once filled me with fear, I smile, because it reminds me of the day I discovered who I really was and what I was capable of. It reminds me that no amount of money, no board, no group of people can ever take away what is rightfully yours, and that sometimes the Greatest battles are fought not with fists or weapons, but with truth, with courage, and with the strength to say enough is enough. That is my story, and it's a story I will carry with me forever because it taught me that land isn't just dirt, it's history, it's memory, it's family. And when you fight for it, you fight for every piece of yourself. If you felt this story in your heart, if it gave you hope or strength, then don't forget to support my channel HD. Stories like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and most importantly, subscribe to HD Stories so you never miss the next one. Together, we can keep these stories alive and remind the world that truth and courage always win in the end.
The day had started like any other. I was just returning home from the grocery store, carrying bags filled with food for my family, when I felt the sharp sting of eyes watching me. The sound of footsteps followed, and then came a voice filled with entitlement and arrogance. A teenage boy stepped in front of me, blocking my way, and demanded that I hand over my groceries. He didn't ask. He demanded, as if I owed him something. I froze for a moment, shocked by the audacity. Before I could respond, his mother stormed out of her house. She looked at me like I was an intruder in a neighborhood where, apparently, I didn't belong. Her son smirked, standing tall beside her, knowing she would back him up. And then it happened. She picked up her phone and dialed the police, her voice loud and filled with venom. "There's a suspicious man here," she shouted, pointing at me like I was a criminal. The humiliation hit me like a punch in the chest. I stood there holding my groceries, feeling the weight of injustice pressing down. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, whispering, their eyes filled with curiosity but not courage. The mother, this self-appointed neighborhood guard, acted as if my very presence was a threat. The boy sneered at me, almost enjoying the spectacle he and his mother had created. And all I could think of was how many times stories like this end badly for people who look like me. Fear crept in for just a moment. But then I remembered, this wasn't going to end like that. Not today. The sound of sirens grew louder, cutting through the tense silence. Soon, 2 police cruisers pulled up, and officers stepped out. The woman raised her voice even higher, her arms flailing as she accused me of harassing her and her son. She called me dangerous, a liar, someone who didn't belong here. The officers glanced at me, unsure of what to make of the scene. My heart beat steadily, but I kept my composure. I placed the grocery bag gently on the ground and reached into my back pocket, slowly and deliberately. The officers stiffened, their hands brushing their holsters, but then their eyes widened as I pulled out my badge. I looked directly at them and said in a firm, clear voice, "Commander James Carter, Metropolitan Police Department." The shift in energy was immediate. The officers stood straighter, their expressions changing from suspicion to respect. The woman's face drained of color, her confident smirk collapsing into disbelief. Her son stuttered, trying to backpedal, suddenly not so bold anymore. The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. For once, the truth weighed louder than lies. I didn't yell. I didn't have to. My presence and my badge spoke louder than her accusations ever could. I calmly explained the situation, every detail of how her son had demanded my groceries, how she had lied and tried to weaponize the police against me. The officers listened closely, their eyes narrowing at her. She tried to interrupt, but her words stumbled over themselves. The truth was undeniable. Her arrogance had been exposed, not just to the officers, but to everyone watching from their windows. The officers turned to her, not me. One of them asked her why she had made a false emergency call, a serious crime in itself. She stuttered again, her voice breaking under the pressure. The boy, who only minutes ago thought he could humiliate me, now stood trembling beside her. And in that moment, justice didn't come in the form of punishment. It came in silence, the silence of shame, of consequences she never expected to face. I picked up my groceries, nodded at the officers, and began walking back home. Each step felt heavy with relief, but also with sadness, because this wasn't just about groceries or a phone call. This was about something much deeper, about dignity, respect, and the fight to be seen as human in a world where some people still refuse to see. And yet, as I walked away, I carried not just food for my family, but also the quiet strength of knowing the truth had spoken for itself. Life has a way of exposing the truth at the right moment. That day, their lies fell apart, and justice stood, tall, not with anger, but with dignity. And maybe, just maybe, they learned that not everyone they try to step on will stay down. If you felt this story deeply, don't forget to like, comment, and share. And make sure to subscribe to my channel, HD, Stories for More Powerful Stories That Matter.
I always dreamed of having a small cabin yard in the countryside, a place where I could escape the noise of the city and breathe in the fresh air. The cabin was not fancy, but it was mine, and every piece of land around it was a treasure to me. I worked hard to fix it up, planting flowers, building a small fire pit, and stacking wood neatly on the side to make it feel like home. The yard was peaceful. Every morning, I woke up to the sound of birds chirping and the gentle wind brushing through the trees. I would sit on my porch, sip coffee, and feel thankful that I had found a place where I could finally relax. It felt like freedom, but of course peace does not last long when you have an HOA nearby. And in my case, peace was shattered by a woman everyone in the neighborhood called HOA Karen. She believed it was her mission in life to control every blade of grass, every trash can, every decoration, and every neighbor who dared to be different. She was not just annoying, she was obsessed. Karen had a problem with my cabin yard from the first day she saw it. She came walking up to my porch one afternoon, her face tight and angry. She looked around like she was inspecting a crime scene. She said, "This place looks out of control. This is not how the neighborhood should look. You need to cut the grass shorter, remove that woodpile, and stop leaving tools out." I calmly told her that this was my private cabin yard, that it was not part of the HOA rules, and she had no authority here. That answer did not sit well with her at all. She crossed her arms and glared like she had been personally insulted. She said, "I am going to make sure you regret this. I am going to get the board involved. You will see." I laughed it off at the time because I honestly thought she was bluffing. I had no idea just how far she was willing to go. Over the next week, she started showing up more often. Sometimes she would just stand at the edge of my yard taking pictures with her phone. Other times, she would yell across the street telling me what I should or should not do with my cabin. It was like having a prison guard instead of a neighbor. I ignored her, hoping she would get bored and move on, but I was wrong. One Saturday afternoon, I was outside stacking firewood when I heard sirens in the distance. I did not think much of it until two police cars pulled right into my driveway. The officers stepped out, serious and alert. I was confused because I had done nothing wrong. They walked up, and one of them said, "Sir, we received a complaint from your HOA about disorderly conduct and safety concerns regarding your yard." I looked past them, and sure enough, Karen was standing across the street with her phone out, filming everything. She had actually called the cops on me. I felt anger boiling inside, but I stayed calm. I told the officers, "This is my cabin yard. It is private property. I have broken no laws, and I have every right to live peacefully." The officers walked around, looked at the yard, and honestly looked embarrassed. They saw neatly stacked wood, a clean fire pit, a few tools, nothing unsafe or illegal. One of them even said, "Sir, I do not see any violation here. This looks fine to me." Karen started shouting from the street, saying, "He is lying. He is hiding things. His yard is dangerous." She was red in the face and looked almost unhinged. That is when I decided to end this nonsense once and for all. I walked back to my porch and pulled out something that made everyone freeze. It was a large binder full of documents, property records, and legal exemptions I had prepared months earlier when I bought the cabin. I knew the HOA had no authority over my land, and I had proof right there in black and white. The cops looked over the documents and nodded. One of them said, "Ma'am, this property is not under HOA jurisdiction. You cannot enforce any rules here." Karen's mouth dropped open. She could not believe what she was hearing. She tried to argue, but the officers cut her off and told her if she kept making false complaints, she could face charges. Herself, the moment was priceless. Her confidence melted away. She looked around, as if the ground itself had betrayed her. She had expected to humiliate me, but instead she humiliated herself right in front of the whole neighborhood. A few neighbors even came out to watch, and some of them laughed quietly at her defeat. From that day forward, she avoided me completely. She no longer walked by my yard, no longer took pictures, no longer shouted. Across the street, it was like she had vanished in peace. Returned to my cabin yard once again, I could sip my coffee in the morning without worrying about her nosy face appearing at the fence. But the truth is, I learned something important that day. Bullies like Karen thrive when they think people are afraid of them. When you stand your ground with facts, with calmness, and with proof, they lose all their power. She thought she could control me, but she only exposed her own weakness. Life at the cabin has been peaceful since. Then I spend my weekends working in the yard, enjoying bonfires under the stars, and inviting friends over for barbecue. Sometimes we laugh about the day HOA Karen called the cops thinking she had won, when in reality, she lost everything that gave her power. What I pulled out that day was not a weapon, not a tool, not something to scare anyone. It was the truth. And the truth always wins in the end. Karen may still be out there bothering someone else, but she knows better than to mess with me again, and honestly, that is the sweetest victory of all. And to anyone watching my story, if you ever face a situation like this, remember that knowledge and preparation are the strongest shields you can have. Stand tall, protect what is yours, and never let someone like Karen bully you out of your peace. If you enjoyed this story and want more real lifestyle stories just like this, make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe to my channel HD Stories. Your support keeps these stories alive and helps us bring you even more powerful videos every day.
It was a quiet morning in Cedar Key, a small coastal town where life moved slow and peaceful. The post office was the heart of the community. Everyone came there not just to send letters, but to share small smiles and good mornings. But that peace shattered when the door swung open hard, and Karen, the head of the local HOA, marched in with anger written all over her face. She slammed a folder labeled HOA on the counter and shouted, "I want every piece of HOA mail you have right now." The room went silent. The postmaster, Mark, a calm man who had worked there for 20 years, looked up slowly. "Ma'am," he said softly, "I can't hand over mail that doesn't belong to you personally." But Karen didn't care about rules. "I'm the head of the HOA. This is official business," she yelled. Mark tried to explain that federal law protected private mail, but Karen's anger only grew. She accused him of hiding letters, of being disrespectful, even of conspiring against the HOA. The young clerks behind the counter froze. They had seen angry customers before, but never like this. "Ma'am, please calm down," Mark said, still patient. But Karen leaned forward, pointing her finger at him. "You think you can tell me no? I run this town," she screamed. The people waiting in line stepped back, watching the scene unfold in shock. Mark took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. But when Karen slammed her hand on the counter, shouting that she'd have his job, something inside him changed. He straightened his posture and said firmly, "That's enough. You are threatening a federal employee and violating postal law. I will have to call the authorities." Karen blinked, stunned. "You wouldn't dare," she whispered. But Mark didn't argue. He quietly picked up the phone and called the police. The room was dead silent, except for the sound of his steady voice reporting the disturbance. When officers arrived, Karen tried to twist the story, claiming she was only doing her duty. But everyone there had seen what happened. The officers asked her to step outside. She argued for a moment, then finally left, fuming but defeated. After she was gone, the post office was quiet again. One of the clerks whispered, "Sir, are you okay?" Mark nodded, but his heart was heavy. He hadn't wanted a fight. He just wanted peace, respect, and fairness. The values he believed in since the day he first wore that postal uniform. Word spread quickly through Cedar Key. People came by to thank Mark for standing up for what was right. Some brought him cookies, others just a smile and a handshake. But Mark didn't feel like a hero. He just felt grateful that truth still mattered. A week later, Karen returned. No shouting this time. She waited in line, clutching a small envelope. When she reached the counter, Her eyes were downcast. "I went too far," she said quietly. "I'm sorry." Mark looked at her for a moment, then nodded gently. "We all make mistakes," he said. "What matters is that we fix them." That evening, as the sun set over the calm streets of Cedar Key, Mark locked up the post office. He paused outside, watching the golden light hit the sign that read, "Serving our community with pride." He smiled softly. Because for him, this job was never just about letters. It was about people. It was about doing what's right even when it's hard. Sometimes one moment of courage can remind an entire town what integrity really means. Not control, not power, but respect. For more stories like this, like, comment, share, and subscribe to HD Stories. Every story has a truth worth hearing. Don't miss the next one.
They say HOA Karens will try anything to control their neighbors, but I never imagined mine would fake court papers just to get rid of us. She thought she could scare us, humiliate us, and kick us off our own property. But what she didn't know was the judge she'd have to face wasn't just anyone. It was my mother-in-law. And when the truth came out in court, Karen's little scheme turned into her worst nightmare. When my wife and I bought our home, it felt like a dream come true. We had worked hard for years, saved every penny, and finally had the chance to live in a quiet neighborhood with tree-lined streets and friendly families. At least, that's what we thought. For the first few weeks, everything seemed perfect. Our kids loved playing outside. We planted a small vegetable garden, and life finally felt peaceful. But then came Karen. She lived just 2 houses down and was the self-appointed queen of the HOA. From the moment she introduced herself, it was clear she wasn't welcoming us. She was sizing us up. Karen had a way of speaking that made everything sound like a warning. "Around here," she told us, "we follow the rules. No exceptions." At first, I thought she was just being formal, but I quickly learned this woman lived for power. Within a month, the letters started. Complaints about our lawn being too natural. Notices about our kids leaving their bikes on the driveway. Fines for having flower pots that weren't approved by the HOA board. My wife and I rolled our eyes and ignored most of it, but Karen did not like being ignored. She wanted control, and she wasn't getting it from us. Then one morning, I found something taped to our front door that made my stomach drop. A thick envelope marked with official court order. Inside were documents that claimed we were being evicted from our home due to repeated HOA violations. The papers looked real at first glance. They had seals, signatures, and even a scheduled court date. My wife nearly broke down crying, thinking we were actually going to lose our home. But something felt wrong. The county court name was misspelled. The judge's signature looked like it had been scribbled by a child, and the whole thing just felt off. Still, Karen strutted around the neighborhood, bragging that she had finally taken care of the problem family. Neighbors whispered, some avoiding us completely, as if we were criminals. Karen's plan was working, or at least, she thought it was. Instead of panicking, I decided to make a call. A close friend of mine was a lawyer, and I sent him copies of the papers. It didn't take him long to confirm what I already suspected. They were completely fake. Karen had forged an entire eviction order. She had typed up the documents on her own computer, printed them out, and even faked a judge's signature. What she didn't realize was that forging legal documents is not just a petty prank, it's a crime. A serious one. We wasted no time reporting it to the authorities. And when the day of the real hearing came, we were more than ready. Karen showed up in her usual smug fashion, carrying a binder full of evidence against us. She was smiling, whispering to her little circle of friends, acting like she had already won. She had no clue that her entire world was about to collapse. When the judge entered the courtroom, Karen's grin disappeared instantly. Because sitting at the bench wasn't just any judge, it was my mother-in-law. My wife's mom had been a respected judge for years, known for her fairness and sharp mind. The look on Karen's face was priceless. Her jaw nearly hit the floor, and her confidence melted away in seconds. Still, Karen tried to talk her way out. She claimed she didn't mean any harm, that the papers were just a draft, and that she was only trying to enforce the rules. But the evidence was undeniable. The fake court order had her fingerprints, her handwriting in the margins, and even her printer's unique ink pattern. Every piece pointed directly at her. My mother-in-law didn't hold back. She told Karen that abusing the law to intimidate neighbors was one of the lowest, most dangerous things a person could do. Karen had crossed a line that couldn't be ignored. The courtroom was silent as my mother-in-law's voice echoed, making it crystal clear that Karen wasn't just a bossy neighbor anymore. She was a criminal standing before a judge. By the end of the hearing, Karen's empire had crumbled. The judge ordered her to pay heavy fines for forgery and harassment. On top of that, she was barred from holding any HOA position again. The neighborhood, once fearful of her, now saw her for what she truly was, a bully hiding behind fake authority. For the first time, we walked through the neighborhood without feeling like outsiders. Neighbors who had avoided us now came forward, apologizing for believing Karen's lies. Some even admitted they had been victims of her intimidation too, but were too scared to speak up. As for Karen, she could no longer strut around like she owned the place. Her smugness was gone, replaced by the shame of being exposed in front of the entire community. Her attempt to kick us out had backfired in the most humiliating way possible. And the sweetest part of it all, justice wasn't just served, it was delivered by the one person she never saw coming, my mother-in-law. Karen had tried to fake the law to destroy us, but in the end, the real law came down on her harder than she ever expected. And that's how one HOA Karen's fake eviction turned into her biggest downfall. If you enjoyed this story of justice and karma, make sure to like this video, share it with friends, and subscribe to stay with us for more powerful real-life stories. You're watching HD Stories, where the truth always... They pulled up in their shiny golf carts like they owned the world, barking orders, waving clipboards, and threatening eviction papers. HOA Karen stood at my gate, shouting that my fence violated community standards. The only problem? This ranch was mine, not part of their little neighborhood. What she didn't know was that I'm the federal officer who oversees every HOA board in the entire country. Before we dive in, comment which country you're watching from. It all started on a quiet Sunday morning. I was enjoying coffee on my porch, watching the horses graze under the sunrise, when a convoy of HOA members rolled up to my driveway like they were invading enemy territory. The woman leading them, blonde hair, sunglasses, clipboard in hand, marched up the path like she was walking into court. I knew her type before she even opened her mouth, the self-appointed queen of suburban power. Everyone in town just called her Karen. She slammed her clipboard shut and said, "Sir, you're in violation of HOA Code 47B, unauthorized fencing, unapproved structures, and livestock within residential boundaries." I nearly spit out my coffee. I calmly said, "Ma'am, this is a private ranch, not part of your neighborhood." She crossed her arms, giving me that smug smirk people get when they think they're smarter than you. All properties within 3 miles of Maple Creek Estates are under HOA jurisdiction. You'll need to remove those fences or face daily fines. Her tone was sharp, but her ignorance was sharper. I'd seen power-hungry HOA presidents before, but this was next level. She started snapping pictures of my barn, my gate, even my truck, muttering about evidence for the board meeting. I tried to reason with her, but she kept cutting me off, saying, "Rules are rules. We'll handle this the proper way." 2 hours later, I got an envelope taped to my mailbox, a notice of violation, complete with a fine for noncompliance. That's when I knew it was time to stop being polite. I called a friend in the state housing division and asked for the full charter of the Maple Creek HOA. The more I read, the more ridiculous it got. They had illegally expanded their jurisdiction years ago, something that directly violated federal housing laws. You see, my job isn't just managing my ranch. I'm part of a federal oversight agency that monitors homeowner associations nationwide, the same agency that reviews and approves their authority charters. In Maple Creek HOA, they were about to learn they picked the wrong man to mess with. The next morning, I drove into town. Karen and her crew were holding one of their community meetings at the clubhouse, complete with pastries, coffee, and gossip. I walked in quietly and took a seat in the back. When she saw me, her smile disappeared. "Sir, this meeting is for residents only," she snapped. I replied calmly, "Good thing every HOA meeting under federal review is open to oversight officials." The room went silent. Her face froze. I reached into my folder and placed my ID card on the table, Federal HOA Regulatory Division, with my name embossed in gold. You could have heard a pin drop. Karen's confident posture melted in seconds. "Mrs. Johnson, I said, looking her straight in the eye. Your board has been operating outside its legal jurisdiction for over 2 years. You've fined, harassed, and intimidated multiple property owners unlawfully, including me. Her hands started shaking. I didn't know, I interrupted softly. That's what everyone says before the audit begins. Within a week, the investigation was in full swing. My office received dozens of complaints from residents, people too scared to speak before. One man said Karen fined him $200 for having an American flag too large. Another woman said she was written up for having a garden gnome that clashed with the community aesthetic. Karen's little empire began to crumble. The HOA bank account was frozen pending review. Board members were questioned, records were pulled, and violations were stacked so high they could fill a courtroom. Meanwhile, I just carried on with my life, feeding my horses, fixing fences, and watching from a distance as justice worked its slow magic. Then one morning, I heard a knock on my door. It was Karen, without her clipboard this time, just a folded piece of paper in her trembling hands. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. I came to apologize, she whispered. I didn't know who you were. I didn't know what we were doing was illegal. I sighed and looked her in the eye. It's not about who I am. It's about what you did. Power is meant to serve people, not control them. Tears welled up in her eyes. We were just trying to keep the neighborhood beautiful. I nodded slowly. That's fine, Karen. But beauty means nothing when it's built on intimidation. She handed me the paper, a formal resignation letter. She had stepped down as HOA president and was cooperating fully with the audit. Later that week, the entire board was dissolved. Federal oversight took control temporarily, ensuring fair elections and proper management moving forward. The residents finally had peace. No more unfair fines, no more threats. People could paint their houses, grow their flowers, and live freely again. A few days later, one of the older residents stopped by my ranch. Thank you for standing up to them, he said. We didn't know how to fight back. I smiled and said, sometimes, the best way to stop tyranny is to let it expose itself. As the sun dipped over the horizon, I sat back on my porch, sipping coffee again, the same spot where it all began. The wind carried a calm silence across the land. For the first time in months, Maple Creek was quiet. And Karen? Last I heard, she moved to another town, one without an HOA. Maybe she finally learned that control isn't the same as respect. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to HD Stories for more powerful and emotional stories like this. Because sometimes, justice doesn't need noise. It just needs the truth. I never thought a simple wooden fence could nearly destroy my peace of mind. You see, I own a small cabin tucked away near the edge of a quiet neighborhood. It's nothing fancy, just a cozy little place with pine trees, a wide yard, and a view that makes you feel like the world finally slows down. That cabin has been my safe space for years. But peace doesn't last long when you've got an HOA with a woman like Karen running around. Karen was the kind of neighbor who believed rules applied only when they benefited her. She strutted around like she was the sheriff of the subdivision, measuring lawns, snapping photos of trash bins, even counting how many cars people parked in their own driveway. For a while, I ignored her. But then one day, things changed. Karen showed up at my cabin, hands on her hips, sunglasses perched on her head like she was inspecting property lines she didn't even own. She announced, without hesitation, that the HOA had decided a new fence needed to be built. And not just anywhere. No, this fence would slice directly across my yard, right through the open space where my kids played and where my dog loved to run free. I laughed at first. I thought it was some kind of mistake. But Karen wasn't smiling. You don't get a say in this, she said, smug as ever. It's already been approved. Now, here's the thing. I had checked my deed, my land survey, even spoken with a lawyer before buying the cabin. My property line was clear as day. The HOA had no authority to force a fence on my land. So I told her no. That's when the threats started. Within a week, I had letters in my mailbox stamped with official HOA letterheads. Words like non-compliance, fines, and legal action were scattered across the page. It was intimidation, plain and simple. But Karen wasn't done. One morning, as I was sipping coffee on the porch, I heard the sound of tires crunching on gravel. 2 police cruisers rolled up. Karen was right behind them, waving her arms like she had just caught a criminal in the act. She pointed at me, yelling to the officers, He's refusing HOA orders. He's blocking construction. He's trespassing on HOA land. Trespassing. On my own yard. The cops approached, calm but serious. They asked for paperwork. Karen shoved a folder at them, documents filled with maps, notes, and highlighted passages. It all looked official, until I realized what she was doing. She had altered the property map. The HOA's copy conveniently erased part of my lot, redrawing the boundary so that half my yard appeared to belong to the HOA. I'll admit, my stomach dropped. For a moment, I wondered if this whole nightmare could actually cost me my land. But I didn't argue. I didn't shout. Instead, I nodded and said, "Go ahead. Build your fence." Karen's smirk spread ear to ear. She thought she had won. The very next day, contractors showed up with digging equipment. Karen supervised them like a general at war, standing there with her arms crossed, sipping lemonade. They dug post holes deep into the soil, shovels hitting harder and harder. And then, it happened. At first, it was just a glimmer of water, a small bubble rising through the dirt. Then a gush. The workers froze. Within seconds, the hole filled with water, spilling over, rushing like a broken dam. They had struck something they didn't expect, an old underground spring, sealed and untouched for decades. Water poured out so fast that the yard transformed into a shallow pool. The workers scrambled to pull their equipment out before it was swallowed by mud. Karen shrieked, waving her arms, demanding they keep digging. But it was useless. Word spread quickly. Neighbors gathered, whispering, watching as the yard turned into a marsh. The spring kept flowing, unstoppable, exposing itself right where Karen had demanded her precious fence. By the next morning, the county inspector arrived. He was furious, not with me, but with the HOA. See, that spring was actually on protected land, a natural water source that the HOA had no authority to touch. In fact, disturbing it carried heavy penalties. The inspector ordered all work stopped immediately. He even warned Karen that the HOA could face thousands of dollars in fines for tampering with county-protected resources. Suddenly, Karen wasn't smiling anymore. The cops came back a week later, not for me, but to gather statements about the HOA's misconduct. Karen tried to spin her story, blaming bad contractors and confusing maps. But the truth had already flooded out, plain as day. Neighbors who once stayed quiet started speaking up. They admitted Karen had bullied them, too, sending letters, making false claims, even threatening families who just wanted to enjoy their homes. The fence fiasco was the last straw. The HOA board called an emergency meeting. By the end of the month, Karen was stripped of her title, removed from the board. No more power. And as for me, the spring became a part of my yard's charm. The county even worked with me to preserve it, creating a small pond surrounded by native plants. What Karen meant for control became a gift of beauty. Every time I sit on my porch now, listening to the soft trickle of water, I smile. Because sometimes, you don't have to fight fire with fire. Sometimes, you just let the truth flood out. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, comment, and share to keep these powerful stories alive. Don't forget to subscribe to HD Stories for more gripping tales that you won't want to miss. It all started with a knock on my door on a quiet Saturday morning. I had just moved into my lakeside home, a place I had been dreaming about for years. A peaceful escape, a fresh start, and a chance to finally live life on my own terms. The birds were singing, the water was calm, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. But little did I know that a storm was about to hit me, and it wasn't from the weather. It was from a person who believed she owned everything she laid her eyes on. She introduced herself with a smile that quickly turned sharp. Her name was Karen. She said she was the head of the Lake HOA, and in her words, everyone in this neighborhood has to join, no exceptions. I told her politely that I wasn't interested in joining, that I had already checked before buying my home and my property wasn't legally tied to the HOA. The smile vanished. Her eyes narrowed, her voice rose, and she told me that people who didn't join had no place living there. In that moment, the dream home I had worked so hard for suddenly felt like enemy territory. For weeks, she harassed me. She would stop by uninvited, pointing at the color of my shutters, the length of my grass, even the way I parked my car. She left notes on my door saying I was ruining the community. She told neighbors lies about me, whispering that I was trouble and didn't belong. Imagine being surrounded by beauty, but feeling like you were constantly on trial. It was suffocating, but I kept my cool. I held my ground, because I knew I had every right to live there. Then one afternoon, things escalated. I was sitting by the lake, enjoying the peace I had worked so hard to find, when I heard sirens. 2 police cars pulled up. Out stepped officers with serious faces. And there she was, standing proudly beside them, arms folded, as if she had finally won. She had called the cops on me. She told them I was trespassing on my own property, that I was refusing to follow community rules, that I was dangerous for not obeying her HOA. Imagine that, being treated like a criminal in your own home, in front of your neighbors, your dignity dragged through the mud. The officers approached me, asking for identification. I handed it over calmly. Inside, I was burning with anger, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. She stood behind them, smirking, convinced that she had destroyed me. But then something happened that she could have never expected. When the officers ran my information and checked the property records, the truth came crashing down. I wasn't just a homeowner. I wasn't just some outsider she could bully. I was her landlord. The very house she lived in, the property she boasted about, the place she thought she ruled, I owned it. The look on her face when the officers turned to her and asked for her information was something I will never forget. Her smirk disappeared, her confidence crumbled, and for the first time, she was speechless. The officers explained that she had wasted their time, filing a false report, and that she could face consequences for it. She stuttered, trying to justify herself, but her power had vanished. The very foundation she stood on was mine. The HOA queen had no throne left to sit on. In that moment, the tables turned. All the pain she had caused me, all the nights she made me feel like an outsider, all the times she humiliated me in front of others, it all came back to her in one instant of truth. And I didn't have to raise my voice. I didn't have to fight dirty. Justice came on its own, quietly but powerfully, like the calm after a storm. She walked away in silence, her pride shattered. And the officers shook my hand, telling me they were sorry for the trouble. That night, I sat by the lake again, but this time the air felt different. The water shimmered in the sunset, and I realized something important. In life, people will try to take your peace. They will try to make you feel small. They will try to control what isn't theirs. But when you stand firm, when you know the truth, when you hold on to your dignity, the truth has a way of revealing itself. I didn't just win against her. I reclaimed my peace, my home, and my sense of belonging. And that's the thing about life. Sometimes injustice tries to bury you, but it ends up planting the seeds for something greater. Her cruelty gave me strength. Her lies gave me clarity. Her attempts to break me only proved that I was unshakable. And in the end, the home I dreamed of became more than just a house. It became a symbol of resilience, of standing tall against unfairness, and of the power of truth. So if you've ever felt like the world was against you, if you've ever been treated unfairly or made to feel like you don't belong, remember this. Your worth isn't defined by someone else's opinion. Your home, your peace, your life, it belongs to you. And no one, not even the loudest voice in the room, can take that away. This story isn't just about me and an HOA Karen. It's about everyone who has been told they don't belong, everyone who has faced injustice, everyone who has been underestimated. And I hope my story reminds you that even when people try to tear you down, you can rise above them, stronger than before. Because sometimes the sweetest victory isn't shouting back or fighting dirty. It's standing tall, staying calm, and letting the truth speak for itself. And when the truth finally comes out, it shines brighter than any lie, brighter than any injustice, brighter than any attempt to dim your light. I still see her around sometimes, walking past me with her head down. She doesn't knock on my door anymore, doesn't leave notes, doesn't try to intimidate me. Because deep down, she knows the truth. And the truth is, she never had power over me. The only power she had was the power I refused to give her. This is my story of pain, of injustice, of standing tall, and of redemption. And if you take anything from it, let it be this. Never let anyone steal your peace. Stand your ground, hold on to your dignity, and trust that the truth will always win in the end. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, comment, and share. And don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel HD Stories for more powerful and emotional stories that will keep you hooked till the very end. They say neighbors can make your life better or turn it into a nightmare. I never imagined that standing my ground against one pushy woman from the HOA would bring back a moment that changed a cop's life forever. This story isn't just about rules, property, or lakeside living. It's about justice, family, and an unforgettable twist no one saw coming. When my family and I moved into the little cabin by the lake, it felt like a dream finally coming true. The cabin wasn't large, just a two-bedroom place with wooden walls and a porch that looked out across the water. The mornings were peaceful, the kind of mornings where the mist hangs low over the lake, and the only sounds are the birds and the soft splash of fish breaking the surface. For the first time in years, we felt like life had slowed down. My wife loved sitting on the porch with her coffee, my kids loved skipping rocks along the shore, and I loved the quiet sense of freedom that came with being away from busy streets and noisy neighbors. We thought we had found a slice of heaven. But that peace didn't last long. Within a week, Karen appeared. She was the kind of neighbor who carried herself like she owned everything in sight. Tall, sharp-voiced, and always dressed in bright clothes, she introduced herself as the president of the local HOA. At first, I thought she was just being neighborly, but within minutes, she was already demanding that we sign HOA papers. She insisted it was the only way we'd be allowed to use the lake. I was taken aback because our property deed clearly showed no ties to any HOA. Calmly, I explained that we weren't part of her association and had no obligation to join. Karen didn't like that answer. Her polite smile dropped, replaced with a scowl. She told me I didn't understand how things worked around here. She said families who didn't join the HOA were troublemakers and freeloaders who ruined the community. My kids, who had been laughing by the shore a moment earlier, grew quiet, sensing the tension. I kept my voice steady, telling her again that our land was independent and the lake had public access. That only made her angrier. She raised her voice, accusing us of trying to take advantage of everyone else's hard work. The argument ended with her storming off, muttering that she'd take care of this. I stood there, stunned by how quickly a neighborly introduction had turned into hostility. I could feel my wife's hand on my arm, steadying me, and my kids asking why the lady was so mad. I told them not to worry, but deep down, I knew this wasn't the last time we'd see her. Just a week after that heated confrontation, Karen came back, more determined than ever. This time, she wasn't pretending to be friendly. She marched right up to our porch with a clipboard in hand, her eyes sharp and her tone louder than before. Without even greeting us, she shoved the papers toward me and demanded that I sign them. She said the HOA required it, that every family living near the lake was obligated to follow the association's rules, and that I was breaking the community agreement by refusing. I tried to stay calm. I told her again that my property deed proved we had no connection to her HOA. I even offered to show her the documents, but she wouldn't listen. She waved her clipboard like it was the law itself. My wife tried to de-escalate, gently telling her we wanted peace, not conflict, but Karen wasn't having it. She leaned closer, her voice trembling with anger, saying, "You think you can just live here and do whatever you want? Not on my watch." Then she did something I never expected. She pulled out her phone and announced she was calling the cops. I thought she was bluffing, but within seconds she was dialing, her voice suddenly full of fake tears. She told the dispatcher that we were illegally squatting on HOA property, that we were disturbing the peace, and that she feared for the community's safety. My jaw dropped. It wasn't just a stretch of the truth, it was a complete lie. My kids were watching from the porch, confused and scared. My wife hugged them close, whispering that everything would be okay, but I could see the worry in her eyes. I felt anger rising in me, but I also knew losing my temper would only make things worse. So I stood there quietly as Karen paced the yard, phone to her ear, acting like the victim. 20 minutes later, a patrol car pulled up. My stomach tightened as the officer stepped out, adjusting his hat and walking toward us. Karen ran up to him like he was her savior. She pointed at us wildly, telling him we were breaking laws, that we were dangerous, that the neighborhood was at risk. She was relentless, spinning her story with such confidence it almost sounded believable. The officer turned to me, asking for my side. I handed him my deed and explained calmly that our land was free of HOA ties. He listened carefully, flipping through the papers while Karen kept interrupting, her voice rising higher and higher. Finally, he raised his hand and told her to be quiet. Then, As his eyes met mine, something in his expression changed. It was as if he recognized me. For a moment, the officer just stared at me. He asked for my name again, slowly, like he was trying to piece something together. When I told him, his face softened, and his voice grew quieter. He said, "This man saved my life." Karen froze, completely thrown off. My wife looked at me, confused, and my kids stared wide-eyed. I had no idea what he meant. The officer explained that years ago, when he was a teenager, he had been in a terrible car accident late at night. He said his car was crushed, smoke filling the air, and he thought he would die. But a stranger pulled him out before the car caught fire. That stranger was me. I remembered it then, the storm, the wreck, and the boy I had dragged from the car. I never knew what became of him, but here he was, alive, standing in uniform. He turned to Karen and said firmly, "This family has every right to be here. If you harass them again, you'll answer to me." Karen's face burned red as she stormed off in silence. My wife held my hand, my kids cheered, and I realized sometimes life gives back when you least expect it. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and share. Subscribe now to HD Stories for more powerful stories that inspire and move you. What would you do if the very person supposed to enforce the rules in your neighborhood secretly broke them, right in your own backyard? Imagine walking outside, only to find the HOA cop shamelessly plugging his shiny Tesla into your solar grid without asking, like your hard-earned power was his personal charging station. Well, I didn't just sit back. I decided to fight fire with fire. And trust me, the way it ended? You'll want to hear this. Before we dive in, comment which country you're watching from. I had worked hard for those solar panels. It wasn't just about saving money on my electric bill, though that was a big part of it. For me, those panels represented independence. I wasn't at the mercy of rising utility costs anymore, and I was proud of knowing that my home was running off clean energy. Every time I looked up at the roof, I felt a little satisfaction knowing my investment was paying off. But after a few months, I noticed something strange. My bills started creeping up again. Not by a lot, but enough for me to raise an eyebrow. The whole reason I got solar was to cut down on costs, and now suddenly, I was using more power than before. At first, I chalked it up to everyday life. Maybe the AC was running more. Maybe someone in the house was leaving lights on. But then I dug into the usage reports, and that's when it got weird. The spikes weren't happening during the day when everyone was home. They were happening late at night. Midnight, 2 in the morning, sometimes even 3. Times when the entire house was quiet, and every appliance was shut off. I thought maybe it was some kind of technical glitch with the system, so I reset it. But the pattern kept happening. Big power draws, same hours, almost every night. That's when I decided to investigate. One evening, instead of heading to bed, I stayed up. I turned off every light, sat by the window, and waited. At first, nothing happened. The street was calm, just the occasional car passing by. But around 1 in the morning, I heard the faint crunch of tires on gravel. I peeked out, and there it was. My driveway wasn't empty anymore. A shiny Tesla had pulled up, and right there, crouched by my charging outlet, was the last person I expected. The HOA officer. The very guy who spent his days writing warning letters, handing out fines for things like trash cans being left out too long, or lawns not being trimmed to his liking. And there he was, in the dead of night, shamelessly plugging his car into my solar grid like it was his personal charging station. He didn't even look nervous. In fact, when he caught sight of me staring, he gave this smug little smile, like he knew I wouldn't dare say a thing. At first, I thought maybe I was overreacting. Maybe if I just talked to him like a neighbor, he'd realize how wrong it was and stop. So the next morning, I walked right up to him while he was making his usual rounds, clipboard in hand, acting like he owned the whole neighborhood. I said, as calmly as I could, "Hey, I caught you plugging into my solar system last night. That's not okay. You need to stop." I expected him to at least look embarrassed, or maybe deny it. But instead, he smirked and said, "It's a shared resource. HOA guidelines allow members to make use of community assets." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Shared resource? My panels weren't community property. They were on my roof, bought with my money, registered in my name. Nothing about them belonged to the HOA. I reminded him of that, but he brushed me off like I was some clueless kid. "Look," he said, "if you're going to live in this neighborhood, you'd better get used to how things work. Sometimes, you give a little, you take a little. That's the spirit of the HOA. That spirit turned out to be him taking and me giving, night after night. Every time I unplugged his car, he would sneak back a few hours later and plug it in again. It wasn't even about the electricity anymore. It was the principle. He thought being the HOA cop gave him some special right to walk all over me. And the more I confronted him, the more arrogant he became. One night, I caught him in the act again and told him flat out, "If you don't stop, I'm going to file a complaint." He actually laughed in my face and said, "Go ahead. I'll be the one reading it." That was the breaking point. He wasn't just stealing my power. He was mocking me, daring me to do something about it. And that's when I realized I had to fight back on my own terms. If he wanted to treat my solar grid like his personal gas station, I was going to make sure it became the most expensive charge of his life. So I went to the breaker box, adjusted the settings, and cranked the system to deliver the maximum voltage it was capable of. I knew exactly what his precious Tesla could and couldn't handle. And let's just say, it was about to learn a painful lesson. The next night, I didn't have to wait long. Just like clockwork, around 1 in the morning, his Tesla rolled up my driveway like it owned the place. I stayed quiet, sitting on the porch with a mug of coffee, acting like I wasn't even paying attention. He strutted over, plugged his car into my outlet, and leaned against the hood with that same smug grin. Only this time, things went very differently. At first, the car's lights blinked normally, showing it was charging. But within minutes, the system kicked into the higher voltage I had set. His grin faded fast when the dashboard lit up with warnings. Then came the sparks, tiny flashes around the charging port. His eyes widened, and he scrambled to unplug the cord, but it was too late. The Tesla screeched with error messages, alarms blaring, while a thin trail of smoke drifted from the port. The man who loved parading his authority around the neighborhood suddenly looked terrified, fumbling with the charger like a rookie. He yanked it out and cursed under his breath, jumping back into his car and tearing off into the night. That was the last time he ever tried to steal from me. The next morning, he tried flipping the situation, claiming I had tampered with HOA property. But I was ready. I pulled up the footage from my security cameras, showing him sneaking onto my driveway night after night. When I presented the evidence to the board, there was nothing he could say. The same rules he used to bully others came crashing down on him. Not only was I cleared of any blame, but he was stripped of his position as HOA officer. Justice had finally been served, and the best part? It was powered by the sun. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, comment, and share to keep the stories going. Don't forget to subscribe to HD Stories for more powerful real-life dramas you won't want to miss. You ever meet a neighbor so nosy, so desperate for control, that they'll call the cops on you for simply carrying boxes into your own home? That's exactly what happened to me and my wife. Except this time, the story took a wild turn. Because when the officer showed up, instead of siding with Karen, he froze, looked straight at me, and whispered something that changed everything. Wait, is that Ghost Viper? Moving day is supposed to be exciting, but anyone who has actually done it knows the reality. It's messy, stressful, and exhausting. That morning, the sun was already beating down on us, and my wife and I had been hauling boxes for hours. We weren't laughing or chatting like people in commercials. No, we were drenched in sweat, our shirts sticking to our backs, and every time I bent down to grab another box, my muscles screamed in protest. My wife carried a smaller box past me and gave me that look, the kind that says, "Let's just get this over with." We weren't making noise, we weren't blocking the street, and we weren't leaving trash around. We were simply trying to move into our new home. But, in neighborhoods like ours, there's always someone watching. And in our case, that someone was Karen. From the corner of my eye, I saw her before I even heard her. Standing on her porch, arms crossed so tightly across her chest you'd think she was holding herself together. Her eyes were sharp, squinting like she was analyzing every little thing we were doing. Her lips were pressed thin, like she was tasting something sour. Everyone in the neighborhood already knew her reputation. She was the self-appointed sheriff of the HOA, the woman who believed she had authority over every blade of grass, every fence, and apparently, every moving truck. I tried to ignore her, but the sound of her sandals smacking against the pavement gave her away as she marched toward us. She didn't greet us. She didn't welcome us. Her very first words were sharp and loud. "What are you doing here?" I blinked, confused. "We're moving in," I said simply, motioning toward the boxes in my hands. Not possible, she snapped back. You don't belong here. I've never seen you before. And you're blocking the street with that truck. I turned and looked at the moving truck. It wasn't blocking anything. In fact, I'd gone out of my way to park it carefully so no one would be inconvenienced. My wife, trying to stay polite, gave her a small smile and said, "We're almost done. Won't be long." But Karen wasn't interested in polite conversation. She leaned closer, pointing her finger like she was scolding a child. "This neighborhood has rules. You can't just move in without proper notice. And carrying boxes like that looks suspicious to me." That word, suspicious, hit me wrong. Suspicious for carrying our own things into our own home. I could feel my wife tense beside me. She hated confrontation, and Karen seemed to thrive on it. Before I could explain, or even pull out the paperwork to prove ownership, Karen's hand shot into her purse. She pulled out her phone with the kind of drama you see in bad TV shows. Right there in front of us, she dialed 911, her voice loud enough for the entire street to hear. "Yes, I'd like to report some trespassers," she said, glaring at us. "They're unloading boxes into a house they don't own." My wife let out a sigh so deep it sounded like it came from her soul. She muttered under her breath, "Unbelievable." I just set the box down on the porch and stood tall, staring at Karen without flinching. Inside, I felt a strange calmness. People like her thought they could bully their way into control. But I had dealt with much worse than HOA drama. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly imagine, was that the man she just called the cops on wasn't just some ordinary neighbor. And the moment those flashing lights pulled up, she was about to find out the hard way. The sound of sirens in the distance made my wife roll her eyes. "All this, just for moving boxes?" she muttered. I gave her a reassuring nod, though inside, I felt the tension rise. The patrol car slowed as it turned onto our street, lights flashing softly even though there was no emergency. Karen straightened her posture like she was about to receive an award, waving her arms dramatically so the officer wouldn't dare miss her. The cop stepped out of the car, tall and serious, with that look of someone who has seen his fair share of nonsense, but has to treat every call as important. Karen rushed to him, pointing at us with so much energy you'd think she was uncovering a crime scene. "There they are. That's them. They don't live here. They're sneaking boxes inside. Probably criminals," she exclaimed, her voice shrill and triumphant. The officer walked toward me slowly, his expression unreadable. I stayed still, the box still in my arms, and waited. When he got close enough, his eyes locked onto mine. Something shifted in his face. His stern look softened into recognition. His brows furrowed, then his lips parted slightly in disbelief. He leaned in just a fraction, lowering his voice so Karen couldn't hear. "Wait, is that Ghost Viper?" he whispered. The air felt heavier instantly. My heart thumped once, hard, because that was a name buried in my past, a name I hadn't heard in years. It wasn't just a nickname. It was my old call sign, tied to missions and shadows I never talked about. I gave him the slightest nod, and that was all it took. His eyes widened for a moment, then filled with quiet respect. In that instant, the entire balance of power shifted, and Karen didn't even realize it yet. Karen was still barking orders, demanding the officer do his job and throw us out. But the cop's tone changed completely. He straightened up, looked her dead in the eye, and said firmly, "Ma'am, this man owns this house. He's not trespassing, and you need to calm down." The words hit her like a slap. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. My wife crossed her arms, a small smile tugging at her lips, finally enjoying the justice unfolding in front of us. Karen stood frozen, unsure why the officer suddenly treated me with such respect. The cop gave me one last knowing nod before heading back to his car. From that day forward, Karen never called the cops on us again. She never even dared look in our direction. And my wife? She didn't need to know who Ghost Viper really was, only that Karen had finally been silenced. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit like and subscribe so you never miss what's coming next. This is HD Stories, where every tale keeps you hooked till the very end.